But we're going to get started. So give me just a second to get set up here. And this first slide is just to remind me what we're doing. So we're going to be talking about rosette disease today. What I want you to understand is that there are a little more than 2,000 growers that, when I say grow roses, these are people that propagate roses. They're either rooting cuttings or they are budding or grafting in some other way. Roses are worth a little over $1 billion to the U.S. economy. That's about $400 million in wholesale sales, and those are not re-wholesalers. That's the people who propagate and who bud. But then the thing just keeps rolling over and the value keeps going up. Unfortunately, the rose industry is under siege, and rosette disease has the potential of causing an industry collapse. One of our largest rose growers came very close to that just a few years ago. Couple of examples as far as nurseries goes. The first is from a container nursery in Georgia. Dr. Jane Williams Woodward shared this unfortunate story with me. The grower used to have more than 1 million container roses in their inventory each year. By 2018, they had reduced that to 500,000. Reasons why: one example is a loss of 40,000 3-gallon coral drift roses, valued $10 each. So that was a $400,000 loss. And that wasn't the only block affected. So they have continued to reduce roses in their inventory. And so these types of scenarios concern us. A California grower, large grower, received roses from Ohio in 2016 to propagate. The roses were asymptomatic. The nursery or grower in California did not have a way to check for aerified mites, and that's not an easy thing to do. Between 2017 and 2018, they lost millions in dollars. They had many large blocks, many that went to the horizon that they had to destroy. Their miticide costs, where they were trying to get this thing under control, an application, depending on the miticide they used, was anywhere between $80,000 and $125,000 per application. That's due to size. They limited where they could sell roses. They had to reduce their sales footprint by over 50% of the country. Their reputation took a serious hit. So this is the type of things that can happen. Now, from a landscape perspective, this is a landscape at a strip mall in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. You can see what it looked like in 2011, but 2012, we've lost a substantial amount of that hedge. By the way, that hedge is 75 yards long, but we measured it. And by April 2014, well, I guess the best thing we can say is we're back to uniformity again. Every bush looks exactly the same because they're all dead. And so this type of thing, unfortunately, can happen. The virus and its vector can be found in weedy hosts. There are a number of native rosa species that it can hide in, but it most likely hides in Rosa multifolia, which is an invasive non-native species, also known as multiflora rose. And some people call it Seven Sisters. But the virus will kill this rose. This rose, a mature bush, can produce 200,000 seed a year. The seed can persist on the ground for at least 20 years. When direct sunlight hits the seed, some of them germinate. So as the virus kills this plant, some little ones start to come up and they will reproduce before the virus can kill them. So this thing will not eradicate multiflora rose, simply because multiflora rose cannot reproduce it before it dies. But it's not this simple. In urban areas, I don't think we need weed host. The picture at the top is set. I'm in the parking lot of a Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A leases the building. They have no control of the landscape that is outside. There were more than 50 roses outside, all symptomatic for rosette disease. We tested for the virus RNA. They were positive, so we knew that they were infected. When I took this picture, there was a very strong wind blowing on my back because the prevailing winds would blow right across the road to a retail garden center that had a large number of roses from 3 different rose companies. So where does the fault lie? If people take home infected bushes, they may not be symptomatic. Who's going to get the blame is whoever's tag is on that bush. So I have gotten a number of calls from Knox County and from other counties and other parts and other states. Well, they say Star Roses has a problem. Weeks Roses has a problem. Certified Roses has a problem. Antique Rose Emporium has a problem, and so forth and on and on and on. But where did the virus latch on to the plant? Was it with the grower, or is it a scenario like this and the grower is getting the blame? Another example of this, both from 2018, 2 separate box stores. That is a pink drift rose at a box store that is symptomatic for rosette disease. But there's another box store down in the bottom picture. Once again, the box store leases the building. They don't own it. They don't own the landscape outside. Those disease roses are in a bed right outside their garden center, right across from a fence that would not block. It was a metal fence for over 200 roses for sale. So where is this thing going to come in? It can come from anywhere, and tracebacks are almost impossible. But if you deal with the public, you know they like to assign blame. Okay, so one thing that we can all do is try to stay out of the blame game. Now, the other thing before we get to the thing, I want you to understand that there are a lot of products for sale that people claim will cure rosette. When a bush gets the disease, you can't cure it. There's a lot of other wild claims, sort of like this one here. This is one of my favorites that I found, where someone claimed that the Navy had produced dinosaurs like they did in Jurassic Park and were using it in a secret weapon, and this was the picture. Okay, there's all kind of things on the internet, and so beware and make sure your sources are creditable. So, as Sergeant Friday would say in Dragnet, what we want are the facts, just the facts. And the first place to start, rosette was first found in North America, or described, I should say, described in North America in 1940 from observations made in 1938 in Manitoba, Canada, also Wyoming, northern Colorado, and Montana, and northern California on some wild roses. It was thought for a while to be a virus, then it was thought to be a microplasm, and then it was thought to be a virus, but all that kind of speculation was put to rest by 2 gentlemen at the University of Arkansas, Dr. Laney and Dr. Xanatakis, who in 2011 published a report that it indeed was a virus, and they named it Rosette virus. It's in their Amerivirus genus, which everything in that genus is transmitted by aerified mites. We do have a test for the virus. The virus is a negative strand RNA virus with a lipid coat. If you just look at that circular virus, you've probably seen things that look like it in the news. COVID-19, the virus that causes that, is not in that genus, but they're in the same family. Okay, so it definitely is a virus. Now, we mentioned the vector. The vector is Phyllocoptus fructiphilus. And if you're not familiar with aerified mites, that's okay. A little less than a decade ago, neither was I. And I was very happy not to be. But that obviously has changed. But let me give you an example of the size of the organism that we're talking about. If theoretically I could hold a rabbit in this hand, and in this hand I could hold an elephant, so that you could see the size differential between the elephant and the rabbit. Imagine me doing that with an aerified mite in this hand and the two-spotted spider mite in this hand. The difference in the sizes would be about the same as between the elephant and the rabbit. So an aerified mite is so small that we can't even see it with a strong hand lens. One of the things that has being a plant pathologist, when I first looked at it under a microscope, I went, wow, this is great. They're just a little larger than some of the larger fungal spores. They're microscopic, is what I'm trying to say. So if we look down in the bottom picture, you'll notice something about that mite. It has no eyes. It doesn't have a nose. It doesn't have ears. There are no wings. It has 4 legs. When it is floating in the air, and we'll talk about that in just a couple of minutes, when it's floating in the air, it cannot steer itself. It cannot see a rose bush. So landing on a bush is going to be a random event. Okay. Where do we find these things on a rose? These are niche mites. They are not found just walking around on the leaf surface unless the populations become very high. We'll talk about that in a minute. But what you can see in that picture in the center is a colony of mites where we pulled back where a new leaf was attached to the stem, because they're down in those crevices. And they get way down in those crevices. When rain falls, and they do not like raindrops, when rain falls, because of surface tension, the water can't get down to them. They're in such tight things that even predator mites have a difficult time getting to them. So they're hard to get at with pesticides as well. Now, just to give you an idea, this is a colorized little video that was put together by the late Dr. Gary Vachon. And so let's just look at this thing. And you can see a mite there. There's one there. We're going to focus on this guy. These white golf ball looking things are eggs. Look how big the eggs are in relation to the size of the mite. I know that female mite is thankful, but that egg is gelatinous when she lays it. Okay, she lays about 1 egg a day for 30 days. And so anyway, that's what an aerified mite. That big pink thing there is a gland on a rose leaf. The spaghetti looking stuff are rose hairs. Okay. So how does it get moved around? It's going to get moved around long distance, both to mite and infected plants. Now, believe it or not, that plant with those rosettes on it was unloaded from a truck. But usually it gets moved around while the disease is latent. That means the plant is infected, but symptoms are not yet showing. So this particular cartoon that I put together just means that it can show up anywhere at any time. Now, Localized spread, once it gets there on that truck, is going to be by the mite ballooning. And the way that it does this, out the back end of the mite, it's going to drop a secretion, but it's like glue. And that's going to hold its butt to the leaf substrate. And then it's going to raise up, or that's an acrobatic feat for something shaped like this, going to raise up and make those four legs, spread its little toes, if you want to call them that, out, and they have their hairs on them, and they're going to act as sails. And when the little thing's about to be pulled apart in the air current, so they're so tiny, it doesn't take a whole lot of air currents here. As they're about to be pulled apart, they secrete something that dissolves that little glue type substance, and they pop off the leaf like a cork. So let's take a look at that. And we're going, if magic works here, there we go. And I'm going to speed this up. I'm going to move that, speed this up so that we can get out about, let's see, this is good. So here's a couple of mites that are just crawling around. You see their four legs. And look at that, here's one that's getting ready to balloon. Okay, so see how it's raised up, wiggling those sails to try to get pulled apart. Okay, now, what if they don't land on a rose? They'll do that again. They'll try to feed. If it's a non-host, the only host are in roses species. So brambles are not considered a host. Strawberries aren't considered a host. Apples, other members of the Rosaceae, not considered host, only in the genus Rosa. Okay, and so if they don't land on it, they'll balloon again. If they land on something else, if it's not a rose, they'll balloon again. And they will do that until they run out of energy or starve to death, which we think is somewhere between 3 and 5 days. That's the best guess scenario we have. When they blow in, this is a large retail complex not too far from my office. And it started up in this top left corner is where the first plant was. Now, I have a number of these places around Knoxville. I live 2 lives here. When somebody else asks for help, I do my best to help them get this under control. When people don't ask me for help, I just monitor to see what happens and how things spread, because this is how we learn. I learned a long time ago not to go around volunteering things. You know, let me give you an example on that. Imagine I'm walking down the sidewalk and a physician I don't know meets me on the sidewalk. If he walks up to me and says, "Sir, do you know you're fat?" Well, you are. You're overweight. And if you don't do something about it, you're going to be in trouble. Okay. Now, I wouldn't appreciate him saying that to me. And I have learned the hard way. I don't walk into a place and say, "Do y'all know y'all have disease plants outside?" I don't do that. I'm asked for help, I help. If I'm not asked for help, I'm not volunteering anything. I have plenty of scars to prove that's the wrong approach. Anyway, over time, this thing would go from a clump distribution to a regular distribution. So if we can stop that infection when it first starts, it may be years before another bush becomes infected. So that is one of the things we're going to be working at. One thing that we have learned in the last couple of years, it's a jungle out there. The only literature until just a couple of years ago of mites on roses was Phyllocopter fructiphilus. But we now know that there are 12 mites known worldwide on roses, aerified mites. We have at least 3 of them in the United States. They were first reported in Maryland. Well, isn't that a surprise? Where is the only U.S. taxonomist for aerified mites on ornamentals located? In Maryland. And he found them outside his office. Since then, I've found them in Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Texas. So these to these mites, how they interact with each other, we know that. And we have some preliminary evidence that Aramis, E. aramis and P. fructiphilus don't like each other. So when you find a high population of the one, usually the other one is in decline and disappears. But we haven't been able to figure out which has the upper hand, because we can find it either way when gaining control of the substrate. Knowing what it looks like early is critical. You can have distorted sepals. Those are modified leaves around the buds. Strap leaves, that's long, thin leaves like a razor strap. Sometimes the stems are thickened. Almost always they have increased thorniness. The flower buds can be misshapen. Knowing these early symptoms is critical. But you have to understand there are things else on roses that you have to be aware of and have in the back of your head that mimic rosette disease but are not. The first one in the top left is basal breaks. It's the holy grail of a rose that's in the landscape. This is how a rose renews itself. The shoots come up, they're usually red, they're usually thickened, they do not have increased thorniness. The flower buds are not distorted. The leaves, as they expand, are not strapped. B is Roundup damage, or herbicide damage. In this particular case, we have bunchiness that sort of looks like a witch's broom. We do not have increased thorniness. And the coloration of a Roundup type herbicide exposure to a rose is going to be light green to yellow to white, which is not what we see with rosette. Then in the bottom left, which is C, that is a blind cane. Occasionally a hybrid tea or a floribunda will throw up a cane that is just vegetative and doesn't have a flower. The leaves are not strapped. The stem may be thickened, but there is no increased thorniness either. And finally, in the spring, rose foliage is often red because of high nitrogen in the spring, in the soil. But once again, all those other symptoms are missing. I get many dozens of all four of these things sent to me, asking if this is rosette. So you have to be careful. Now, the most obvious symptom are the rosettes. The one in the bottom right, that thing is about the size of a bushel basket. I've seen the rosettes get so big that they actually pull the bush over. But I hope that as more people become educated, that we won't see this anymore. And the reason for that is that we can't afford for it to get to the rosette stage. So the action stage to do something is when you see it on that first shoot, like we saw in that picture. This one has a thickened stem. It does have increased thorniness. And increased thorniness can be increase in number of thorns, the size of the thorns, or both. And so that's when we want to do something, and we'll talk about what to do in a minute. But why am I so adamant that we can't let things get to the rosette stage? Because we have found that on a diseased bush, that the mite populations on a rosette are 40 to 80 times higher than they are on asymptomatic foliage on that bush. Now, we can find a virus in both the asymptomatic foliage and in the rosette. But the overwhelming majority of those mites are on that rosette. So if the plant gets to this stage of disease, symptom development, you can rest assured that there are many other plants in that planting that are now infected. They may not be showing symptoms, because you see, when a plant becomes infected with rosette, It may show symptoms in 9 to 12 weeks. It may not show symptoms for a year to a year and a half, which is another thing that makes this thing difficult. So what can we do? Well, we've got to be vigilant. Okay, we've got to be vigilant. How many of you saw the leopard? It's right there at the bottom of that arrow. Okay. You know, that thing could have ruined your whole day. And so we have to be careful. This is a bed of roses that was outside the Nashville airport when you were driving in. If you look at the picture, you drove in on one side and out on the other. The bed had over 250 shrub roses in it. And look right there, one diseased shoot on one plant. In 3 years, the entire bed was symptomatic from that one place right there where the plant was not robed quickly, and we lost the whole bed. And that's one of those beds that I was observing. Okay. I ride all over the state of Tennessee from Memphis to Johnson City, and I can assure you that I have beds that I watch. People come out and say, "What you doing, boy?" You know, I tell them, and if they won't help, I help them. But if they don't, I observe. 3 years, and they had to rip every one of those plants out of that bed, all from that one infection. You see how important being vigilant is? With your clients, for your nursery, it is extremely important. Now, what do? Well, we tell people that they ought to remove the plant as soon as they detect it. There's a lot of stuff on the internet that says, oh, you pull a bush up, you can't go back in that hole with another rose for at least a year. I've seen some reports that say 5 years. You can go back in a week. Actually, to be honest with you, you could go back in 2 or 3 days or a day if you wanted to. There's no mites in the soil. And if there are some, they die very, very quickly. But why do I put 1 week? Well, because some places, not North Carolina, but some places where I speak, telling them that they should wait 3 or 5 days. Those are big numbers. Everybody understands the number 1. So, but 1 week, you could definitely go back in. We used to say that you had to bag the plant before you cut it off so that you didn't drop mites out. Well, we've done experiments and we have published this that says, no, we don't have to do that. Now, so we don't recommend bagging anymore. Some people still do because it makes them feel good and it looks like they're doing something. And when there's nothing else to do, it gives them comfort. But you don't have to do that. But you don't want to drag it and knock it around against other bushes or shake it over other bushes either. But you don't have to bag it. If you're in a place where you don't think it's been seen before, send a sample to the state diagnostic lab. But let me assure you of one thing. You are better off pulling out 5 to 10 plants out of a 200 bush bed because of blind canes, basal shoots, whatever, and it's not rosette, than leaving one there that has it. Because that one that has it is going to lead to the destruction of the whole bed. And in a shrub bed, you pull out a rose or 2 around, the other roses will compensate and fill in the space. So you got choices to make there. We've looked at barriers. This is more for rosarians. Actually, the American Rose Society was sponsoring this work, so that's why we were targeting them. And what we found is, remember, the vector and the virus only go to roses species. So we were wondering if we could reduce the virus moving into beds by putting barriers around them. We used a fast-growing variety of Miscanthus sinensis because we knew it would grow fast and it was cheap. And so we put those in as barriers. You can see a barrier bed. There were 8 of these plots. Each plot had 16 roses in them. And what we found is, oh yeah, barriers did reduce the amount of infected plants beds that became infected in 5 years. That's how long the study went. But if the virus did get in through a mite into one of those protected beds, once it was in there, it spread just like it was not protected. So eventually they will get in, but barriers can help. And where this kind of barrier was just a demonstration to see if the thing would work, it is. Now we're looking at, instead of growing roses in monoculture beds for rosarians, growing them more in English garden type things with non-hosts around them. And we're looking at plants that don't seem to compete with roses for water and nutrients, but get big, but not too big. And so we're working on that right now. We've looked at miticides. This was all done for in the landscape. And to be honest with you, these were the miticides at the time that we were doing this, which was we started this work about 8 years ago. So this is what we could get a hold of. Now, we looked at other miticides. I don't list the ones that didn't work. Okay, and I do get asked about some of them. But we lost all our controls, and we had to replant the controls 3 times because all the controls kept becoming symptomatic. But using miticides, we were able to protect those plants for 5 years. So we do know that miticides work, but here is a problem with what we did. This was proof of concept. We overuse those things. Some of these things are not labeled, such as contos. There's not even labeled in landscapes. Some of these things can only be applied by landscapers with a license, like what the pesticide license. Of the 4, the only one that has an active ingredient, bififerin, that's in over 200 homeowner products. The 2 that you see under homeowners, I just captured those images off of Walmart.com. So we only have 1 that homeowners, rosarians, can spray themselves. But when should we start them? Is the application, we were doing this every 2 weeks. That's way too much miticide. How far can we stretch application intervals? We're looking at, we need to look at that kind of stuff. We were happily looking at it and our funding ran out. So we're applying for money to try to get more money. But right now, the miticide work is dead in the water, so to speak. And that's really, really unfortunate, but that's where we are. Now, one of the things, though, that we were looking at in some landscape beds, and 1 in West Knoxville, 1 in North Knoxville, is that we're very interested to know when mite populations start to increase. Well, this is sort of, 3 of the 6 wettest summers on record for Knox County have happened in the last 3 years. And so what that means is that mite populations were going to be kept down by the rain. It wouldn't be eliminated because you see it did expand. We were starting our miticide applications in that study in late April. We don't need to be spraying every 2 weeks in late April, from late April. We're now thinking about late May, early June. We have to expand, we're going to expand this work to Crossville, Nashville, and Memphis. We would love to expand it more, but we've applied for grants and we'll see if we get them. And if we do, because here's the whole key. If you want to know when you start, we have to generate mite curves. Someone does have an idea of when we should start using miticides for control. One thing we do know, mite populations start to decline slightly in the fall, but we have to spray to killing frost. Okay, last thing about this, we get reports of roses that are not affected by rosette. This is a bed of rugosa roses, once again in Murfreesboro. I have a lot of pictures from Murfreesboro because my brother Alan used to live in Murfreesboro. And he was so excited about this bed. And the reason why, you can't see them, But to the left and right of this bed was beds of another shrub rose, and they all became symptomatic and died from rose rosette. But we have not lost in 8 years any of these roses. That sounds pretty good. But are they resistant or immune? Or I do know from work that I've been doing around buildings that the air currents swirl. And they're not always linear when you get near buildings and things. And there is a very large hospital with wings and that kind of thing coming out. Are they resistant, or are mites not being blown into that bed on a consistent basis the way they were those other shrub beds? I don't know. So the only way to do this is to look at these kind of things and control replicated trials. And we've been doing that. And if it takes a village to raise a baby, it takes a whole bunch of people to do replicated trials for rose rosette. So there are 6 of us in Tennessee, and you see the out-of-state partners here. The project leader is a rose breeder geneticist, Dave Byrne at Texas A&M. And we have molecular geneticists such as Oscar, horticulturists such as Brent, and then the 3 pictures on the bottom, they're all plant pathologists as well. Now, every rose in this trial is tested in Tennessee, but Delaware is the size of a postage stamp, and Tom Evans doesn't have room to test them all. So he tests about half of them, and Francisco and Jennifer test the other half in Oklahoma. So we test them all, and in between Delaware and Oklahoma, we have another test. Now, Brent Pemberton is testing these same plants for resistance to black spot and Cercospora leaf spot, and looking to make sure that we don't have some super magnet for aphids while we are while we're testing. Because what we don't want to do is release something that makes another problem worse. And so what we've done is we've looked at roses from all over the world. We've looked at over 28 roses species, many of these native to the United States or Canada or Mexico, but some of them native to Europe or Asia as well. We've looked at over 1,000 cultivars and breeding lines. And these were just some of the examples. I talk about disease. I had a picture of one pretty rose somewhere, and that's why I did that with one of the ones from Australia. Okay, so to date, for at least 3 years, we've looked at a little over 1,400 roses. The replications, depending on what we could get for all these locations, I either had 3 reps, sometimes I had as many as 9. 3.8% of the things we've looked at have been scored immune, free of symptoms, and free of virus. Now, here is, you think that people get upset with each other over politics? Put a bunch of plant pathologists and horticulturists in the same room and throw out the question, what is resistance? And just sit back and let the circus begin. Okay? And because all kind of letters to the editors are wrote, there's a new one coming out about every 4 or 5 years to some journal about what is resistance. Well, let me assure you of this. A long time ago, a taxonomist named Darwin, you may have heard of him, was once asked after he wrote the book Origin of the Species, what was a species? And he said, a species is anything a competent taxonomist says it is, as long as he describes it. So by God, that's what resistance is as well. So my definition of resistance is—
How you doing?
Good.
Well, you have a 100-pound, right? You have a big one?
Same continuum. And so a plant that has lots of symptoms and high virus titer is susceptible. A plant where we can barely detect the virus and it never develops symptoms is resistant. Okay. A plant that does not get the thing is a non-host. It's immune. So that's the way we look at it. So between resistance and immunity, it's almost 6% of what we looked at, but none of these are things people want in their yards. So we've got a lot of breeding to do. But let me warn you of one thing. Those resistant guys there scare me. We can't detect symptoms in most of them, but the virus is in them and we can detect it. If we count the cell of those plants, are they going to act as typhoid Marys? In other words, they could be a source of the virus and viliferous mites to other roses that are susceptible. We have a lot of work still to do. So to end this, how do we look at this thing? The bottom of the pyramid for management is education. That's why I was so excited to take up Danny's invitation today, is knowledge. That's what does it look like? When should I be concerned? As soon as you can detect it, obviously. The next highest level in the pyramid would be resistance. Oh, we know we've got it. We've got resistance, we got immunity, but we got to get it into roses that people want. Scouting and roguing is something that we can do now. I didn't mention leaf blowers, but let me assure you of one thing. Using leaf blowers in rose beds will spread those viliferous mites very, very quickly. That's what we do to get the thing to move around in our resistance trials. A large public rose garden in Manhattan, they were asking, what can we do to reduce it? And I said, well, do you use leaf blowers around your roses? Oh, yes. Well, stop. No more leaf blowers. Well, what are we supposed to do about leaves? I said, there's this very complicated thing that might cause you to have to do some training with your employees called a rake, because they probably haven't seen one in a while. They just have been using a leaf blower. So we don't want to use leaf blowers anywhere near roses. Okay. Barriers to the windward side, they help. I know several public gardens who have put barriers in and they say it has really reduced incidence of the thing. Temporary pruning out rosettes will reduce mites, but you got to remove the bush. But sometimes you can't. I have people that I work with at their gardens. They make money off of their gardens because they use them in weddings. And they can't go in and just rogue out bushes when they detect it because they may not be able to place the rose and they can't have big gaps in their rose beds. So I tell them to cut the symptomatic foliage out because that will reduce mites belonging to other plants. And as soon as you can replace it, do so. And last but not least, miticides. They certainly work, but we need so much more information on that. And right now, to be honest with you, when I'm dealing with someone about miticides, I'm having to give them my best guess. And you cannot imagine how nervous that makes me. So that's where we are. As we learn more about Rosette, it's going to become less of a threat. We're going to beat this thing. And I'm not just saying that because I'm an optimist, although I am. But I'm saying that because when I look back where we were 7, 8 years ago, compared to what we know today, yeah, we're making progress. And if we can get resistance / immunity in the roses that people want, well, my God, we can lick this thing. We're looking at resistance to the virus. We also have a separate trial for resistance to the mite, and we really want both. We've already identified a locus that appears to control symptomatology and virus titer. So we feel like we're well along our way. The other thing is, but look at here, there are some things that are always going to be scary, at least to me. That nursery in New Iberia, Louisiana, The owner said he knew he was in trouble when he heard his employees screaming and running to the parking lot. Leaving the customers were running too, but they were behind the employees. And that big dinosaur with a bloody mouth was walking through the pots. Weeding roses. A good friend of mine sent me this picture. He was his first weeding of roses in Florida, and he was on his hands and knees weeding. Came face to face with an eastern diamondback rattlesnake. See, those things will always be scary, but we're going to beat Rosette. Then he's going to send you the handouts. One is early detection of rosette. There is a large section on rosette, and the second handout, rose diseases and identification and management. Both of these are recent publications by UT. And if you want more information, the UT Soil Plant Pest Center Facebook page, if you're in social media, that page has over 5,000 images of diseases and insects of ornamentals, and it is searchable. And there's not only does it identify what the thing is, but it usually tells you a little bit about it as well. And there's more of these that come out every week. My brother Alan's Twitter, I do not do Twitter. I'm not about, I've seen too many problems with people getting in trouble on Twitter, but Alan does. 3 years ago, his Twitter feed was recognized as one of the top 20 horticultural Twitter feeds in the world. He's proud of that. Just ask him about it and then be prepared to hear a lot. Okay. There is a Combating Rosette Facebook page. Any of us that find something new, it will be on here first. And it will also be on the web page by roserosette.org. That's managed by Kevin Honk at Texas A&M. There's that video up there at the top that you saw. So that is there as well. And then the last resort, hey, Alan and I are always available. If we can be of service, just yell at us. Alan and I are both very proud graduates of North Carolina State, and I can assure you that we can howl with the wolves with the best of them. Okay, so with that, I am done. And if I don't monitor the chat, but if Danny, if anybody's got a question or if there's a question in the chat, I'm happy to help if I can. I don't know where we are on time.
All right, thank you, Dr. Wyndham. We're good on time. We've still got a few minutes here. I'm gonna have Stacy Jones, my counterpart from the central part of the state, address questions in a minute here. In the meantime, I'm going to ask a couple of people if you can help me by putting in the chat who you are or who is present there that I could not find. There's just three. Somebody that just had their first name Tom, and there's several Thomases, and I want to make sure I've got that right, but your name was just Tom. There's one that's just iPhone, and then US Lawns Rock Hill. I know y'all had several people registered. If you can put in the chat, please, who all is there in attendance for me. And once Stacy gets going asking the questions and Dr. Wyndham is replying to them, I will put the link to the pesticide credit Google form in the chat, and y'all can make sure to either click on that to go to it to submit your pesticide license information. If it won't click, you can copy it and then go and paste it in a new window or tab and submit it that way. Is the preferred way of doing that. If somebody does have a problem with that they absolutely cannot get it to work, you can put your information in the chat, but that would be only if you could not do it in the Google form. And I will stay on for as long as there are a number of people on to make sure everybody's able to get that submitted. And you will get an email back confirming automatically that you completed the Google form. So go ahead and turn that over to Stacy, and I will get the link in the chat.
Great. Dr. Wyndham, could you stop sharing your screen? That way we can have
Oh, yes, I'm so sorry.
Oh, no, that's fine. All
There you
right.
go.
Thank you so much. Our first question is, how long before the eggs hatch? How many generations can be expected in a year? And then the next question is, how long does one individual live? So let's just in general talk about the life cycle of these guys.
Let's talk about the life cycle of the mite. When a mite balloons, it's a she, and she is a virgin she. And she is going to land, and when she lands on a rose and she detects that it is a rose and she can feed, she will start to lay 1 egg a day. Now, those eggs take about, depending on the environment, how cool it is, the warmer, the shorter, anywhere from 5 to 7 days to go from hatching and going through a couple of motes to becoming mature. Now, she's unfertilized. So all the eggs are going to give rise to males. And then the males, in about a week, are going to mature, and they're going to be crawling around, and they're going to start dropping onto the substrate that they're on. They're going to start dropping something called a spermatophore. Now, a spermatophore looks like, to me, I like to visualize things, looks to me like a stingray laying on the sand in the ocean in shallow water, if you see one. That's the shape of them. They're sort of oval with a tail. Now, the female mite is going to pick one of those spermatophores up and incorporate it into herself, and she's fertilized. From that moment on, every egg she drops is going to become a female. Now, as those females mature in about a week, they're going to become fertilized, because we've got males dropping these things from eggs hatching from all kind of new females that have become mature, but haven't been fertilized yet. And so this is how the colonies build. They will produce eggs, a mature female, a Phyllocopsis fructiphilus, for approximately 30 days. So they live about 30 days plus a week. Okay. So each female is going to deposit about 30 eggs. The numbers just seem to explode, but they don't explode quickly. And that is why we're so interested in mite and determining when we should apply miticides. I didn't go into the research we're doing where we have developed these little mite catchers that are around in our rose plots, in which we're also trying to determine when they start to balloon as well. That's real tedious and hard work, because all kind of things get caught in those mite collectors. But they're working. We just have a lot of work to do. And at the moment, I have a staff of me and 2 other people. So we have a lot to do. But it's fun, and we love it. Okay. I think, Stacy, that answered both questions.
Yes, sir. The next question is, can we get a copy of this presentation from today? And I believe that the answer to that is yes, that Danny will be sending out some information from today's presentation.
That is my understanding as well.
Okay.
Yes, I will be sending out the handouts that Dr. Wyndham provided as links, web links, and PDF documents.
The next question is, when removing an infected plant, how important is it to remove all the roots?
Well, I've removed a lot of infected plants. And if my life depended on it, I could never tell somebody I got them all. What you want to try to do is make sure that you get enough of the root system so that root sprouts do not come back. Is the key on that. Or if they do start to come back, you got to get them out. If you want to see something that looks absolutely like from a 1950s horror movie. Look at that deceased shoot coming back from a root. It's so distorted. It's just beyond description. I got pictures of them, but they're terrible. You want to put a gun to them. So just dig it out as best you can.
Okay, the next question is, what's the problem with kelthane miticide?
There, as far as what you have to understand is, when we say miticide, many of these miticides do not have aerified mites on the label. Okay, and so, you know, one thing that I learned real quickly when I got into aerified mites, I thought entomologists were going to be able to help me. But most entomologists they're not insects, so I'm not interested. All right, well, that takes out 70% of the entomologists. Okay, and then you got 30% still hanging on. And then you tell them how small it is. And they go, if it's that small, I'm not doing it. Now we get down to about 3% of the entomologists. That's how many we lose. Okay. And then with the 3% that we got left, they go, well, I don't know nothing about them because I really haven't looked at them. In reality, as far as Phyllocoptes fructiphilus goes, there are only 4 true ericologists, that's people who study aerified mites or that study this particular mite in the world. And we lost one of them to death in January from COVID, which leaves us with 1 in the United States. The other ones are all above 80 years of age in Europe. Okay, we are in trouble because you got people like me, who is a plant pathologist dealing with these mites. And I can't find entomologists really interested in them. They're too small and they're bugs. They're not bugs. Oh, don't get me started on that one. Okay.
Okay, so the next,
Some help. So if you know somebody or you want to become a mite expert, let me tell you right now, I have a new graduate student. She's only been in my lab for 2 weeks. And I told her yesterday, I said, congratulations, you're one of the top 5 mite experts in the entire country. And she says, it's as bad as that. I said, yes, it is. Okay, what else? Who else has a question?
Do you need to clean your pruners and spades after dealing with infected plants?
Absolutely, you do. But not because of Rosette. There's no evidence of mechanical transmission of Rosette. And a lot of people have looked. But you should be doing that for crown gall anyway. So the answer is, should you be cleaning pruners and cleaning shovels? Yeah, Agrobacterium tumefaciens, the bacterium that causes crown gall, is a soil inhabitant. That means once it's introduced to soil, it's always going to be there. So should you be sanitizing things? Well, of course. I assume you're doing that already. If not, Danny and Stacy have a lot of work to do. All right. Who else has a question?
Next question. How long does it take for symptoms to show after a mite has latched on?
Well, the first thing is that mite going to transmit the disease? You see, only a small percentage of them actually are carrying the virus. So we got a viviparous mite and it feeds. Well, we think this is tough because you see our detection systems for the virus keep improving. Every 4 to 6 months, I get a new primer to use or some change that's tweaked. The double nested PCR tests we use to detect the virus. But these mites are so tiny and have so tiny amount of virus in them. We just think now we're getting to where we can detect the virus in a single mite. Okay, so this is something we're very anxious to look at. So right now, from the preliminary work that we have, a plant will become infected in 2 to 3 days after the mite begins to feed. Okay, symptoms, at the earliest will develop in about 8 or 9 weeks. So if that plant becomes infected in late August or September, it may not show symptoms to next spring because the plant's going to go dormant when we have a killing frost, and bingo, you know, and you're in North Carolina, that killing frost in a town like Plymouth, North Carolina, my God, how many years did I work with soybeans as a graduate student at NC State in Plymouth? But let me tell you, killing frost in Boone or Blowing Rock is going to occur a whole lot quicker than it is in Plymouth, okay, or Raleigh. And so that's a hard thing to say. But what we do know is that we can infest plants with mites. We can do grafting as well. And some plants of the same cultivar will show it in 9 weeks or so. And other plants, we can detect the virus, but they may not show symptoms for more than a year. And we don't know why. Okay, too long of an answer. I'll try to be shorter.
Very interesting, though. Very interesting. Cindy Lauderdale in the Wilson County Extension Office says that she started a Rosebuster Facebook page, and she'd be happy to view any pictures to help confirm Rosette disease. And she has her contact information here in the chat if anybody would like to see it there. Then we have a question. Is the use of air blast sprayers in production a good or bad idea?
Well, if you're spraying a miticide, I don't see a bad thing with that. If you're spraying other things and you've had issues with Rosette, that may not be helpful. Same reason as remember, these mites, you don't want them being blown around. You can't help the wind, but we don't have to help it either if we can prevent it. Now, in California, where that big grower was having problems, those miticide applications were being done by our plant. Those fields go to the horizon. I've stood in one of them, and it didn't matter if I looked northeast, south, or west. The rose field went to the horizon. And so that's something that you won't have in North Carolina. I recognize that's a very different system.
And
problem is, Stacy, what I need to point out is that to date, most of our work has been focused at the landscaper and the homeowner for 2 reasons. That's where in Tennessee, we have most of our problems, and that's where we've been able to get money. And, I hate to keep fussing about that. It's the same way with you. You won't be in business if you ain't got money coming in. Well, it's the same way with us. I get this beautiful office that's about the size of a jail cell from the University of Tennessee, and they pay the light bill. And everything else is up to me. And that's not a complaint. That's just a fact. All right. Who else has a question?
Okay, there's not any other questions, but we do have a lot of thank yous. And this one, I think, includes the spirit of all of your thank you messages. This has been an amazing class today. Fantastic information. Thank you, Dr. Wyndham. And I would echo that. You're always one of my favorite speakers to listen to. I love how you incorporate fun and funny information into your presentations. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Stacy, you're being mighty kind. There's one thing y'all have to understand. I don't put humor in there to just have humor. When you're talking about dying and rotting vegetation, the damn subject can get boring really, really quick. Okay. I teach a class on diseases of ornamental plants. If I don't throw some humor in there in each class, I mean, I have people with their heads down on their desk. They just passed out from boredom. So I've learned over the years, you got to make rotting vegetation seem a little more palatable. I've had a great time being with you. My brother and I'm serious. We're not native to North Carolina. My first child was born there. You know, they put that footprint of him when he was born, and they put that black ink on his foot, and the nurse looked at me and said, "He's a Tar Heel." And I said, "The hell with that." And I went over and washed his foot off while he was screaming. I am a Wolfpacker. I am not a Tar Heel, and I don't like Duke Blue either. So if that offends any of you, I'm sorry. That's just the way it is. I do howl with the wolves, and I'll just leave it at that. Have a great day. It's been a lot of fun at my end, and y'all been more than kind. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. Wynn. We appreciate it. And let us know if we can help you in any way as well.